Okay, here we go. Welcome, everybody. We're very pleased to host this program with David Alpern. And I'm just going to give you a little quick background on David. Starting in 1966, he was a reporter, writer, and senior editor at Newsweek. And after earlier stints at the pre-Murdoch New York Post, the Daily Journal of Elizabeth, New Jersey, and the United Press International in New York. In 1982, he launched Newsweek on Air, the weekly hour-long network radio broadcast, later also a podcast. It was heard across the country, around the world, via Armed Forces Radio. It featured interviews with Newsweek staffers and the newsmakers they wrote about, including Katharine Hepburn, Katharine Graham, Woodward and Bernstein, Cronkite, Kempton, Hamill, Breslin, Carré, Caro, Robert McNamara, Ted Sorensen, Nancy Reagan, Nora Ephron, Rosemary Clooney, Barbara Cook, and Dustin Hoffman. So a varied and exciting background career. I won't take up any more time in background information, but I want to welcome David M. Alpern, and he has a wonderful program for us today, and let's look forward to it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to have you watch this. It's a labor of love, but far from technical excellence. I was limited in my tools and talent. To do it live for you right now, it would take at least 2 more pairs of hands to get the words and the pictures all synchronized. So let me just start it. For those who know and love Le Carré, maybe something a little more, and for those who don't, maybe a great introduction. So here we go.
It was a year ago, December 12, 2020, that David Cornwell left us. Better known to millions of fans worldwide as spy novelist John le Carré, and already living with prostate cancer, the 89-year-old Cornwell, with an E, tripped in the bathroom of his home in Cornwall, with an A, went to hospital with several fractured ribs, caught pneumonia, and died shortly after, according to a coroner's report. In the years since, we've learned, Cornwell also left us an appropriately enigmatic farewell gift, the previously finished but just lately published novel Silverview, about an innocent British bookseller suddenly enmeshed in a Secret Service search for the source of leaks about post-Cold War embarrassments. Apart from its plot, the mystery is why the famed former spy pulled the book back from his agent years ago for only posthumous publication, if any. Perhaps, as his novelist son Nick Harkaway suggests, because it presents an even more grim and disheartened view than his usual of the intelligence game, its leaders, their morality, humanity, competence, and useful accomplishment. But still, as one critic wrote, a fitting requiem for the career of the man who brought a new level of complexity and humanity to espionage fiction. To all fiction, I and many others feel. I had the pleasure of meeting Cornwell once, exchanging email with him twice, and featuring him 3 times on the Newsweek radio broadcast I hosted for many years. Our first conversation was in February 1983, when co-host Gil Gross of RKO Radio and I heard Cornwell's words and backstory, courtesy of Newsweek European editor Ed Baer and the author himself, beginning with one appeal of the secret world.
Secret world, to people who are outside it, offers the promise of action. Others think and meet in committee and ponder. But the secret world, it seems, promises the chance of cutting right through the red tape, right through all the compromise, and doing what is actually necessary.
That quiet, elegant voice, talking about the secret world of espionage, belongs to a quiet, elegant British writer named David Cornwell, but better known to his millions of fans as John le Carré, author of a best-selling series of espionage novels, The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, The Honorable Schoolboy, and Smiley's People. Le Carré's latest novel, The Little Drummer Girl, is just about to show up on the shelves of your local bookstore, and author Cornwell is the subject of a major story in Newsweek this week. To learn more about him, we have the reporter who has spent weeks with Cornwell and the people who know him best, European regional editor Edward Baer in London. Ed, the story this week says that one reason for the engrossing quality of Le Carré's fiction is the on-scene research he does for each book. I've heard about the long nights he spent drinking with veteran correspondents in Asia before writing The Honorable Schoolboy, and you picked up details of an even more elaborate intelligence-gathering operation he conducted in the Middle East for this latest book. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, he's been a long time working on this book, and he started with several trips to the Middle East and to the Palestinian camps in southern Lebanon and Israel, talking to senior Israeli officers, military intelligence, and then moving over to Lebanon. He saw Arafat 4 times. He spent some time in Palestinian camps. He questioned 2 women prisoners of the Israelis who had been convicted for trying to blow up an El Al airliner from Kenya. And he is distinguished, I think, from any other writer for this kind of factual reporting. When he was writing Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, for instance, there's a point in the book where Smiley, the famous counter-spy, moves into a seedy little Paddington hotel in order to set up a secret headquarters because he no longer trusts the British Secret Service where there's a mole. Well, David Cornwell moved into just such a little seedy hotel in Paddington and spent some days there just to find out what it was like. That's the kind of writer he is.
The other thing that separates Le Carré from other spy writers is his sense of intelligence work itself, both the tricks of the trade and the moral ambiguity of the dirty tricks designed to defend democracy. It's well known, Ed, that he was an Army intelligence, later the British Diplomatic Service, but you learned from several sources that he was, in fact, an undercover operative as well. Tell us the details about that, and then we'll listen to Cornwell's reply when you put all that to him.
Yes, obviously I can't quote names because there is a thing called the British Official Secrets Act, and anybody who actually reveals such information is liable to prosecution. But what I do know from several sources, mostly retired intelligence sources, is that he was first a counterintelligence agent doing all sorts of things, including bag jobs, what's known as bag jobs in the intelligence trade, which
Breaking and entering.
photographing documents, breaking into houses, and so on and so forth, and then moved to SIS, or MI6, which is Britain's intelligence gathering operation overseas. And it is really in Britain now an open secret that this is what he did with the cover of an official British diplomat, very much as a number of CIA operatives, for instance, function under diplomatic cover.
And now John Le Carré on his own Secret Service.
It is quite true that I have, at one time or another, nosed around the secret world. I don't think that if I were able, but I am not, to describe what I had done, it would satisfy the fantasies of outsiders.
Le Carré's chief character today, George Smiley, is among the most endearing in all fiction, I think. A cunning master spy with the manner of a bank clerk or a shoe salesman. But the model for Smiley didn't come from the world of espionage at all, he told you. Who was the real George Smiley?
I think the real George Smiley is a combination of people that one of them undoubtedly is an elderly don at Oxford called Vivian Green, who has been a kind of father figure to David Cornwell all his life. Vivian Green doesn't have an intelligence connection. He was in fact a parson at a public school that David Cornwell attended when he was a boy, and then later as a medieval historian he was a don or a professor at David Cornwell's Oxford College. And he is very much in the physical mold of the famous character George Smiley. And I met him in Oxford, and indeed Vivian Green recognized there were many things about himself that he realized were put into the Smiley character.
Despite that very specific origin of Le Carré's hero, many people have been struck by the similarity between Smiley and a man who, until not too long ago, actually did run British intelligence, Sir Maurice Oldfield. And in Ed's interview, Le Carré talked about a meeting that he set up with Oldfield and the man who played Smiley on television, Sir Alec Guinness. And let's hear about that.
The 2 knights, one of the stage and one of the secret world, examined one another, each from his position of professional sagacity. And I can't remember anything serious that we talked about, except that Sir Maurice told Sir Alec that my view of the secret world was too deprecating and did not do justice to the honorable men and women who committed themselves for reasons of patriotism to this rather unsung and unspectacular life.
With all the success that his Smiley books have won, why has Le Carré suddenly dropped the world of British intelligence with its wonderful cast of people and places, the circus, the moles, the lamplighters, and babysitters? And what is his new book about?
His new book is a very sophisticated, very well-written and incredibly suspenseful book about the secret war between Israeli secret intelligence and Palestinian terrorists. It begins as though it is being told entirely from the Israeli point of view, and then about halfway through the book you realize, as always are with Le Carré's books, that there is something much more than this, that there are layers and layers and layers and layers. And there is, in particular, one last suspense, which lasts about 100 pages, which will make it a page-turner such as I think one has seldom come across in this kind of literature. And he told me that he had given up writing about Smiley, in part because he felt that George Smiley had become simply too much of a popular figure through the incredible success of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy and Smiley's People on television. He put it to me that the character of Alec Guinness as Smiley had made him such a well-known popular figure that he had become, I quote, an unsecret to me. So I think, regretfully, John le Carré is no longer going to write about Smiley, except that he's probably going to go back in a kind of time warp and write about Smiley again, but as Smiley as a secret agent, as a younger man in the Second World War, Smiley maybe even before the Second World War as an agent in Nazi Germany and so on. I don't think we've seen the end of George Smiley, but we've seen the end of his career.
Okay, thanks. We've been talking about the master of espionage novels with the principal reporter for this week's story on Jean le Carré. That's Newsweek European Regional Editor Edward Baer, who's a pretty smiley guy himself when it comes to digging out other people's secrets.
In fact, Smiley shows up in two subsequent Le Carré novels, ruefully reflecting on the Cold War in The Secret Pilgrim, and in A Legacy of Spies, which revisits the covert operation at the heart of the spy who came in from the cold through the eyes of a top Smiley subordinate. Also, we later learned another model for Smiley was actually a senior intelligence colleague of Cornwell's, who had himself written spy novels. John Bingham was squat and pudgy, albeit also a ladies' man, with the trademark habit of polishing his spectacles on the end of his tie, and the ability, it was said, to lose himself in a crowd. In May of 1989, co-host Warren Levinson of AP Radio and I spoke directly with Cornwell himself about finally visiting the Soviet Union and the novel that followed.
Opening theme music from the movie version of The Spy Who Came In From the Cold, a 1960s novel that introduced the world to author John le Carré, instantly acclaimed as a master of Cold War espionage and Cold War contradictions, patriotic double-crosses, ambiguous loyalties, divided souls.
There followed a string of le Carré bestsellers, including Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, The Honorable Schoolboy, Smiley's People, The Little Drummer Girl, and more autobiographical, The Perfect Spy.
This week, the latest le Carré hits the bookstalls with a difference. The Russia House is his first novel of espionage in the era of glasnost, when new stirrings of freedom and dissent inside the Soviet system mean new levels of unpredictability on both sides of the Iron Curtain. It is also the first book le Carré has been able to research by actually visiting the Soviet Union.
From Russia with Love, it might have been called, if that title hadn't already been taken. John le Carré is the subject of this week's cover story in Newsweek. To talk about the Russia House, glasnost, espionage, and himself, we're pleased to have John le Carré, real name David Cornwell. Welcome to Newsweek On Air. I was surprised to learn that you hadn't been to Russia before, though it's understandable given your admissions to Newsweek and others that you had actually worked in British intelligence under Foreign Service cover. What made you decide to go after all these years?
Well, I thought it was time, in the most simple historical sense. I was quite certain that to be in Russia at the moment was to be present as an extraordinary period of our history. It was going to be as exciting as, so to speak, as standing in Berlin and watching the Reichstag burn, only this time the Reichstag was being restored and things were looking more positive.
Was their decision to let you in itself a sign of glasnost?
I think it was. It wasn't easily made. I applied first to the Soviet embassy in London and received no answer at all to my letter to the cultural attaché. And then I went through our ambassador in Moscow, and all of a sudden the walls came down and I got an invitation from the Union of Writers.
How did the Russia you saw compare with the Russia you've written about in such dark detail for so many years?
Well, perceived from outside during the Cold War, the Soviet Union looked like a dark castle, and I think I described it that way. And I described indeed both camps as groaning under the weight of the Cold War and the misery of ideological complexity, and on the Soviet side, enslavement to a system that wasn't working. Most particularly, I suppose, I thought of the Soviet Union as monolithic, as a centrally organized outfit, because of its repressive capacities and its repressive effect upon its population. By the time I got there, it was so clearly disintegrating that that monolith could no longer be found.
You were offered the chance to meet British traitor Kim Philby, a rough model for some of the Soviet moles in your fictional British Secret Services, but you refused. Why?
Well, I felt it inelegant to be the guest of the ambassador one night, that is, of the Queen's representative, and the guest of the Queen's biggest traitor the next night. And so if it was an invitation to meet Kim Philby, I was quite pleased to pass it up. I also don't think that I could have sat with Philby indefinitely without losing my temper. One does have to remember that he was a killer. He was, by my perception at least, a man of natural and persistent deceit. I thought he was a hateful man. Always.
The Russia House will be published in the Soviet Union, but others of your books have not. Though I understand you have quite a following among an underground following among the computer set.
Yes, that was very touching when I got there to discover that students, for example, at the State University had apparently run up my books in English on a word processor and stood round it in groups and watched the pages being turned. So I was very moved by that.
It's computer samizdat.
That's right, computer samizdat, exactly.
What is there about espionage that makes it such an effective and affecting setting for serious contemporary novels such as yours?
Well, it's all around us, that's the first thing. I think all of us know that, to a great extent, the version we are given of political events is not the reality. When all of a sudden we get a scandal like Irangate, we have held up to us to inspect the other perhaps 9/10 of political life. So espionage enables us to interpret our perceptions in terms of conspiracy. That's one thing. But I think beyond that, the condition of the spy is one in which to some extent we all live. Whether in relations to the institutions we work for, the firms, corporations we work for, within marriage, outside marriage, all of us have secret lives that we're aware of. We often think we're the only people who live them, but in fact most of us, to one extent or another, share those secret lives. And so perhaps the universality of my stuff in some way speaks to the unexpressed part of us.
I wonder if what we've been exposed to in real life spying over the last few years, attempts on Fidel Castro's life, etc., make it harder or easier to write spy fiction.
I think that it certainly in my case, it was always necessary to pull back from the reality in order to make one's stories credible. I mean, if you take, for example, the Watergate affair, if I'd set out to write a story about a president who bugged himself by mistake, I would have been ridiculed. And so it goes in the espionage business. If I'd written a story about flying cakes to Tehran, really people would have said Le Carré's lost his marbles. So I really have to find a much more modest context for my stuff.
Do you think that Glasnost and a new era of good feeling, to the extent that they last, will make it harder for the East-West spy novel and the real-life self-serving intelligence bureaucracies of both sides?
I think the fun will be for those who write in the genre to break the pieces up, to listen and watch history in the making, and to readjust to whatever comes along in the future. I think what one must bear in mind is that the prospect of peace breaking out in no way suggests that espionage will be run down as an industry. Quite the reverse. I mean, if your former enemy is breaking into pieces and you don't know which way the pieces are going to jump, you must spy the living daylights out of him. What I do know is that I'm thrilled to face the future of perestroika and look for other theaters and other political situations to write about. I'm very glad to be given a whole new deck of cards.
I must say, the only thing better than reading your books is hearing you read them. I gather you just won one of the books that you've read on tape has just won a prize for that, and I don't think anybody does your work and all of the voices as well as you do.
Well, thank you very much. I can do bird noises too, but I won't do them now.
David Cornwell, better known as John le Carré, author of The Russia House, just going on sale, and the subject of this week's cover story in Newsweek. Thanks again. Forget we ever talked.
After that phone interview, I actually met Cornwell at a publisher's party for the Russia House, where he led me across the room to meet his older brother, Tony, then working at a Manhattan ad agency. I was flattered, of course, but even more so later when a new biography of Cornwell revealed what a stabilizing force Tony had been during their traumatic childhood, with a mother who fled early from the physical and emotional abuse she suffered at the hands of their father, the now infamous Ronnie, when he was not off enjoying the life of an adulterous international con man or imprisoned for it. There are clear echoes of Ronnie in the father figure of Le Carré's A Perfect Spy, and in the villainous arms dealer Dickie Roper in The Night Manager. Ronnie's legacies for young David reportedly included some drunken fondling that the boy made himself imagine was not happening, producing perhaps the first of his secret selves. Even Cornwell's selection of a pseudonym is shrouded in mystery and contradiction, to the point he would later say he could not even remember why he chose Le Carré, beyond that he was looking for something eye-catching and exotic, as his government service precluded using his own name. Carré is literally a square, four-sided figure, or town square, but figuratively solid. Cornwell once referred to a bal carré, where girls ask boys to dance, suggesting opposite of the usual. To another interviewer, he said an carré is a little bit of a dubious guy. That seemed to me to suit me perfectly at that time. But the definition I found was quite the opposite, a man of direct character and without flourishes, getting right to the point. But after all, what's in a name, to quote another English author? David's mother left him a good ear for spoken language and a knack for mimicry, which leads to a brief sidebar here on Cornwell's voice when narrating his own work. To my ear, elegant yet modest, engaging, often ironic and self-deprecating, and also when conjuring voices for so many of the characters he created or actually met.
Recording is
For his approach to writing, it turns out, was dramatically opposite that of his fierce fan and fellow author Robert Caro, the Pulitzer-winning biographer of New York master builder Robert Moses and master politician Lyndon Johnson. Caro, as widely reported, hesitates to write a word before his exhaustive research is complete. Cornwell started by conceiving the story, setting, plot, characters. Then he packed pad and pen to visit actual places he had in mind, to see and hear and smell them, meet actual men and women of the sort he had conceived, to hear them speak, watch them react. As he put it, first comes the imagining, then the search for reality, then back to imagining and to the desk where I am sitting now. There he would revisit, revise, and enrich his earlier text as he saw fit, with the incomparable, if unheralded, aid of his devoted wife Jane, a former book editor, whose death from cancer and a broken heart followed his by only weeks. Fortunately for his fans, and especially devotees of the master spy Smiley, Cornwell narrated an abridged audio version of his debut novel Call for the Dead, in which Smiley makes his very first appearance and speaks with the voice his creator imagined for him. In this scene, Smiley copes with an officious British intelligence superior, and then at his command with the East European widow of a Foreign Office civil servant who had apparently committed suicide while under investigation, all voiced by Cornwell. Note that Smiley speaks more or less like Cornwell himself, which should suggest how close he felt to his prize creation.
I must have all the facts, Smiley. I must do my duty. If there's anything you feel you should tell me about that interview, anything you haven't recorded, perhaps, tell me now, and let me be the judge of its significance.
There's nothing to add, really, to what's already on the file, and what I told you earlier tonight. The allegation against Fennon was pretty thin. University membership in the 30s and vague talk of current sympathy. Half the cabinet were in the party in the 30s. Marston frowned. He rang the bell. Elsa Fennon opened the door.
They rang and asked me if I minded. I didn't know what to say. Please come in.
She must have been older than Fennon, a slight, fierce woman in her 50s with hair cut very short and dyed to the color of nicotine. He told her his name.
You are the man who interviewed my husband about loyalty.
She led him into the low, dark drawing room. There was no fire. I liked your husband very much. He would have been cleared.
Also in audiobook form is The Pigeon Tunnel, Cornwell's memoir of people, places, and problems he encountered while growing up as diplomat, secret operative, writer, and celebrity. If the voice of Smiley at his first appearance is pretty much that of Cornwell himself, in Pigeon Tunnel, the author provides his impression of the versatile and venerated actor who defined Smiley on screen, Sir Alec Guinness, after the two lunched with Sir Maurice Oldfield, a real former chief of Britain's MI6, as described earlier.
How about another cognac for the road, Guinness suggests, and we hardly resumed our places before the interrogation begins. Those very vulgar cufflinks, do all our spies wear them? No, Alec, I think Maurice just likes vulgar cufflinks. And those loud orange suede boots with creped soles, are they for stealth? I think they're just for comfort, actually, Alec. Crepe squeaks.
Cornwell also provides the voice of British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher at a more elevated London luncheon.
There were 6 tables set in the dining room of 10 Downing Street that day, but I only remember ours, which had Mrs. Thatcher at its head, and the Dutch Prime Minister, Ruud Lubbers, at her right, and myself in a tight new grey suit on her left. The year must have been 1982. I was just back from the Middle East. Lubbers had just been elected. Our other 3 guests remain a pink blob to me. But I do remember Mrs. Thatcher turning to the Dutch Prime Minister and acquainting him with my distinction. "Now, Mr. Lubbers," she announced in a tone to prepare him for a nice surprise, "this is Mr. Cornwell, but you will know him better as the writer John le Carré." Leaning forward, Mr. Lubbers took a close look at me. He had a youthful face, almost a playful one. He smiled. I smiled. Really friendly smiles. "No," he said, and sat back in his chair, still smiling. But Mrs. Thatcher, it is well known, did not lightly take no for an answer. Oh, come, Mr. Lobos. You've heard of John le Carré. He wrote The Spy Who Came In From the Cold and, fumbling slightly, other wonderful books. Lobos, nothing if not a politician, reconsidered his position. Again, he leaned forward and took another, longer look at me, as amiable as the first, but more considered, more statesmanlike. No, he repeated, and, evidently satisfied that he had made the correct finding, again sat back. Now it was Mrs. Thatcher's turn to take a long look at me. Well, Mr. Cornwell, she said, as to an errant schoolboy who had been brought to account, since you're here, implying that I'd somehow talked my way in, have you anything you wish to say to me? Belatedly, it occurred to me that I had indeed something to say to her, if badly. Having recently returned from South Lebanon, I felt obliged to plead the cause of stateless Palestinians. Lobos listened. The gentleman from the industrial north listened. But Mrs. Thatcher listened more attentively than all of them, and with no sign of the impatience of which she was frequently accused. Even when I had stumbled to the end of my aria, she went on listening before delivering herself of her response. Don't give me sub-stories, she ordered me, with sudden vehemence, striking the key words for emphasis. Every day, people appeal to my emotions. You can't govern that way. It simply isn't fair.
Another leader whom Cornwell sought out for insight on the enduring Israeli-Palestinian conflict in his novel The Little Drummer Girl was Yasser Arafat, then president of the Palestinian National Authority, and too busy at his desk even to look up at first.
He leans back and reaches out both hands to me in greeting. I take hold of them, and they're soft as a child's. His bulging brown eyes are fervent and imploring. Mr. David, he cries, why have you come to see me? Mr. Chairman, I reply, in the same high tone, I have come to put my hand on the Palestinian heart. Have we been rehearsing this stuff? He's already guiding my right hand to the left breast of his khaki shirt. It has a button-down pocket, perfectly ironed. Mr. David, it is here, he cries fervently. It is here.
Cornwell and Arafat end up dancing together to celebrate a school for Palestinian war orphans, and Cornwell later played a cameo role in Drummer Girl on screen. Relations were not so rosy when the author asked a post-Soviet Moscow nightclub owner and crime boss named Dima if at least some of his ill-gotten gains might someday see a philanthropic purpose. One of Dima's henchmen later proved at least a bit more valuable.
Dima doesn't fling his arms around. He speaks a measured Russian. The supporters club starts to giggle. The short-haired sentries at the door giggle. But Dima goes on talking. Satisfied at last, he puts his hands together and waits for our interpreter to relay his message. Mr. David, I regret to tell you, Mr. Dima says fuck off. Seated under the crystal chandelier in the lobby of our glitzy Moscow hotel, a slender, shy man of 30 in a grey suit and spectacles sips at his orange fizz while he explains the code of conduct of the Thieves' Brotherhood, or Vori, of which he is a made member. I have been told that he is one of Dima's soldiers. Perhaps he is one of the suited men selling fire insurance to my publisher. By his careful choice of words, he puts me in mind of a Foreign Office spokesman. Have the Vori changed much since the collapse of Soviet communism? I would say the Vori have expanded. Owing to greater freedom of movement in post-communist era and better communications, we may say Vori have extended influence in many countries. And here in Russia? I would say that social chaos in Russia has benefited many Vori activities. Such as what activities? I would say here in Russia, drugs are profitable. Also, many businesses cannot function without extortion. Also, we have gambling houses and many clubs. Whorehouses? Whorehouses are not necessary to the Vori. Better we own women and arrange hotels for them. Sometimes we own the hotels also.
The polar opposite to the Vori was the French angel of mercy Yvette Pierpole, diminutive victim of childhood rape, later a veteran of prostitution, eventually in the import-export game, but increasingly devoted to helping children and refugees imperiled by conflict from Cambodia to Africa, Guatemala to Kosovo, where she died in a road accident on one of her aid missions. Wrote Cornwell, "It was Yvette's work I now realize that I wish to celebrate when I embarked on The Constant Gardener, whose heroine also dies in pursuit of compassionate ends." Yvette's approach and voice is best heard when she uses her considerable sex appeal on a Swedish aid official.
As they stumble over the sand dunes in the darkness, Yvette proposes a childhood game. Stand still. So, now you place yourself close behind me, closer. So, that is very nice. Now I close my eyes and you put your hands over them. You are comfortable? I too. Now you may ask me one question. Any question in the world, one only, and I must answer the absolute truth. If I do not, I am not worthy of you. You will play this game? Good, I too. So, what is your question? His question, predictably, concerns her most intimate desires. She describes them, I am sure, with brazen falsehood. She dreams, she says, of a certain handsome, virile Swede making love to her in a perfumed bedroom on a lonely island in the midst of a turbulent sea. Then it's her turn. She spins him round, and perhaps with less tenderness than the poor fellow might have expected, claps her hands over his eyes and yells in his ear, "What is the nearest competitive tender? To Swiss Indos for the delivery of 1,000 tons of rice to the refugees on the Thai-Cambodian border."
Perhaps the man and voice Cornwell least expected to encounter at the Frankfurt Book Fair in 1965 was 75-year-old Fritz Lang, storied director of dark, iconic motion pictures from Weimar to Hollywood, who wanted to talk about making a film of the Le Carré novel, A Murder of Quality. It centered on a retiring schoolmaster who kills one of his pupils to conceal an earlier crime, even worse, right up Lang's often grim alley. He was waiting in the lobby of Cornwell's hotel.
You like California? I like California very much. You come to California, huh? We work together, we make a script, we make a movie. Black and white, like your spy who came in. You got a problem with black and white? No problem at all. You got a movie agent? I name my movie agent. Listen, I made that guy's career for him. I talked to your agent, we make a deal. After Christmas, we settle down in California, write a script.
Lang, already wearing a trademark black patch over one eye, was by then going totally blind. He never got back in touch. So, quite a varied collection of voices, but you may wonder, what about the bird noises of which Cornwell boasted on our radio show? Not yet having listened to all the audiobooks he narrated, I can't be definitive, but in the Pigeon Tunnel, appropriately enough, we do come across an admirable avian at Beirut's Commodore Hotel, then war-torn but welcoming to journalists, arms dealers, drug dealers, peacemakers, and troublemakers.
Its most revered resident was an elderly parrot named Coco that ruled over the cellar bar with a rod of iron. As the techniques of urban warfare became ever more sophisticated, from semi-automatic to rocket-propelled, from light to medium, or whatever the correct vocabulary is, So Coco updated his repertoire of battle sounds to a point where the uninitiated guest grazing at the bar would be roused by the whoosh of an incoming missile and a shriek of, "Hit the deck, dumb bastard! Get your ass down now!"
And with that, let's return to Cornwell's own voice in our final radio interview.
I just feel, I feel it's bad luck to talk about the unwritten books. What I do know is that I'm thrilled to face the future of perestroika and look for other theaters and other political situations to write about. I'm very glad to be given a whole new deck of cards.
Novelist David Cornwell, better known as John le Carré, talking on this program in 1989 after it was clear that the context of Cold War espionage he exploited for so long had been terminated, as they say, with extreme prejudice. One of the new cards in his deck is revealed this week with the publication of his latest novel, The Night Manager, one of several new books Newsweek recommends for summer reading. Le Carré tops the Newsweek list with his tale of a former English military killer drawn back from the world of high-class hotels to foil a plot involving arms merchants, drug cartels, and intelligence services clutching for life in the post-Cold War world. And we're delighted to have John le Carré on the line with us now. Welcome back to Newsweek On Air.
Thank you very much.
At the end of your new novel, you acknowledge the arms dealers who opened their doors to you. How does their secret world compare with the world of espionage that you know so well?
Well, they're very closely linked. I think that one does tend to forget that with arms dealers, when a country, by whatever means, achieves an arms deal with another country, it achieves also a lot of leverage. I mean, it isn't just a question of selling them a few thousand Kalashnikovs and moving out. What you're doing is buying a very influential part of their system. So you're supplying the arms, you're supplying the training, you're supplying the technology, the aiming devices, the this bits, the whoosies, and so on. And on top of that, you're supplying the spares, and you're sending in teams of advisors and things like that. So you really have a ball exercising influence and winning minds, or if not minds, bodies.
How is it that you came to write about this world? I mean, was this something that you settled on immediately after it was clear that you could not write about Cold War spying the way you had?
Well, I was very interested in the leftover junk from the Cold War, which takes a number of forms. First of all, an enormous lot of hardware out there, as we know. You know, all of a sudden we're facing the Ukraine as a nuclear superpower, theoretically. Any amount of conventional weaponry, billions of dollars worth of ex-American equipment, for instance, still in Vietnam. And the stuff we poured into the Middle East, that's all around. So that I saw arms as being kind of a leftover scrap, but very dangerous scrap, from that prolonged, finished ideological confrontation. And on top of that, there's some kind of metaphor to be worked out, and the book tried to address that, about the total exploitation which was somehow legitimized by ideological confrontation and is no longer legitimized. I mean, we could do anything in the name of anti-communism for all those years, in a sense. And now we really have to stop and ask ourselves why we're doing this stuff.
I was curious about the acknowledgement that David mentioned at the outset of the interview from the arms dealers themselves, and I wonder if you can tell me why they let you into their world and what form that took.
You know, when I developed the premise, which seemed at first sight to be ridiculous, that major governments might be setting out in one way or another to arm the Colombian drugs cartels, which is the underlying theme of the story. It's not the most important part of it, but it's the playground where the thing works. I went to Panama and talked to 3 or 4 players in the arms business, and I said, let's take an absurd case. I mean, you've got these guys, they're making limitless money, billions and billions of dollars worth of money, and they are not properly protected. They have bunches of boys with jeans and Uzi machine guns and stuff. Is it a conceivable notion that an unscrupulous arms dealer would get alongside them and say to Pablo Escobar or his advisors, we can provide you with a real fighting arm? I mean, something that will take the Delta Force straight out of the sky when they come and get you. Look what happened to Noriega and so on. These boys are getting very, very, very restive, very impatient. you better have some stuff that can equal what they can deliver, and I can provide it. And one guy I put this premise to, he thought for a long while and said, well, I tried it, but they're terribly difficult to work with. He said Fidel tried it, didn't really play, interested them for a while, and they kind of went off the boil. Then he said the French tried it, again it didn't work, and then the Israelis were there in some form, and they used British mercenaries, but that all blew up in their faces, and there was bad publicity. And so, generally speaking, we agree that it can't be done. So my fantasy turned out to have been a well-trodden path.
Let's move from the geopolitics to a more literary question. Am I correct in noticing that the end of the Cold War has brought a bit more sexual heat into your novel?
Well, maybe... Yes, I think that's true. I think what he's really done is taken the constraints off me. I kind of walk freer, walk taller. I'm a happier soul. Now it's over, even though we face temporarily a kind of chaos and indirection. And I sing in my bath a bit. I'm really glad it's over, and I think that infects my writing, and I think of the things that matter more. The things you can enjoy, and human relations, and pretty girls, and that stuff.
I wonder, though, how you are reacting to, for instance, the situation in New York, the Middle East passions that are rising again, even developments in Eastern Europe, Bosnia especially, both as a novelist, a former intelligence operative, a human being. Might we see some plot backgrounds developing there for you?
Yeah. Wow, that's a big double question. But let me take the first part of it, how I react to the introduction of Middle Eastern terror, I think. Can we put it like that?
Sure.
Has been
back to the Little Drummer Girl.
In Europe. I think that I did speak about that, write about that in The Little Drummer Girl. It is an eternal and insoluble question, and we have an awful lot of fence building to do to come to terms with Islam, to understand Islam. If we're going to get into the business of trying to turn Islam into the new Antichrist, into the new peril, to have Islam replacing communism, we will be really silly. But we do have, I'm not trying to be soppy about this or forgiving, but we do have to remember that we have taken very strong positions at one time or another in the Middle East, that we have espoused one country after another, often when those two countries were at war with one another, and we have made very serious enemies, and we have, in their perception, made some very bad bedfellows. And these things come home to roost. I'm not suggesting that's justification for such terrible action as these people may have contemplated, but it's an explanation.
And Eastern Europe, and in fact the old Soviet Union.
Sorry?
I'm just wondering how you're reacting to developments in Eastern Europe, Bosnia, and your former fictional stomping grounds of the former Soviet Union.
Well, it's a sadness to me that we somehow did not seem to spend very much time as the Cold War was ending, wondering what would follow. We're dealing with fragmentation. We're dealing with the problem of our own identity. We don't know, but we're going to have to work out whether we're going to have to commit ourselves to altruistic wars in the future, whether we're going to have to take up a policy of repeated intervention in troubled spots. Personally, I think that's what we have to do. I mean, I'm only a scribbler, but I've had a platform for it. I have advocated the notion of a volunteer army raised by the United Nations. It's the same notion that was recently also advocated by Brian Urquhart, who was Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations. We have a volunteer army. We go in very fast. We sharpen up the decision-making process inside the Security Council. We make the Security Council more attractive to the third world than it's been so far. We give it more visible and altruistic purposes. We keep our national interests at bay, but we do stop brushfire wars. We separate belligerents as quickly as possible. We back this military action by the United Nations with draconian sanctions, and we force people to negotiate. I mean, I think that is our future role. But if we take the Bosnian situation as some kind of test case for who we're going to be in the future. Up till now, we've failed it miserably.
John le Carré, David Cornwell, thank you very much for thinking about these things. Thank you for continuing to write about them for us, to consider the real issues and to give us wonderful fiction. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Over the years, Cornwell became increasingly dyspeptic about Western foreign policy and practices, overt and covert, and so upset by Brexit under Prime Minister Boris Johnson that before his death he had switched to Irish citizenship. There also were questions about his candor discussing himself after so many years of professional deception and creative license. According to the Washington Post, when a journalist questioned his memory of certain events they witnessed together, Cornwell replied, "Your job is to get things right. Mine is to turn them into good stories." Cornwell was repeatedly kind and seemingly candid in our interviews, and I hope you'll agree, in several email exchanges with me. In 2014, after sending a link to our 1989 conversation to info@lecarre.com, with fingers crossed that it would reach Cornwell himself, came back a reply. "Dear David, thanks so much for your email and your kind words about my work. I do remember our meeting at the book party for the Russia House back in '89. It was most kind of you to send the audio clip of the Newsweek on-air radio show and the link to the encores. I'm in the throes of a long novel and reluctant to leave the bubble until it is complete, but will listen to the clips once I can lift my head. With renewed thanks and all good wishes, David Cornwell." In 2016, I sent a link to our conversation about The Night Manager, just as a TV miniseries based on it hit U.S. screens from the production company created by two of his sons, and after publication of John le Carré, the biography by Adam Sisman, with Cornwell's cooperation. Again, with fingers crossed, and again, eliciting a reply. "Dear David, well, thanks again. I wouldn't make too much of Sisman. To me, it's a botched autopsy and a missed opportunity. I had hoped for something a little wiser and more coherent, as some sort of gift of truth to my children. My mistake. On the brighter side, I'm publishing a memoir in September, and I'm happily at work on a new novel, so life goes on. My sons have been extraordinary, and the making of The Night Manager was a splendid family event. I'm so happy for them that it came off so well. I played in all respects a totally insignificant role, but the being there was a delight. All the best to you and yours, and thanks again for writing so warmly. Best, David." The totally insignificant role Cornwell played in The Night Manager, transposed from south of the U.S. border to Mallorca and the Middle East for TV, was visible briefly on screen. He was dining at a restaurant near the undercover hero and the villainous arms dealer when one of said dealer's henchmen steals the lobster his character had ordered, for which said henchman is punched out by said hero, who then apologizes to an understandably still vexed Cornwell. But that, it turns out, was not his first cameo for a Le Carré dramatization, in the manner of another beloved Brit, film director Alfred Hitchcock. For one version of The Little Drummer Girl, he was the waiter in a sidewalk cafe. In A Most Wanted Man, he was at another cafe in the booth adjoining that of its star, Philip Seymour Hoffman. In Our Kind of Traitor, he was a ticket taker at the Einstein Museum in Bern, Switzerland. And in a remake of Tinker Tailor, he sang heartily in a bizarre Russian-themed MI6 Christmas party. Personally, I always find Le Carré on screen a guilty pleasure, because no matter how skillful the actors, directors, and screenwriters, even in some cases Cornwell himself, the form can little more than hint at the inner thoughts, vivid characterizations, and artful, propelling prose of Le Carré books. Still, I am delighted to learn that Cornwell's filmmakers' sons, Simon and Stephen, plan more of their Ink Factory productions of his work, perhaps someday including Silverview, the only completed novel he left. But there are more bits and pieces of his writing that may be publishable or expandable, including a book of what his agent Johnny Geller calls amazing letters, already in the works. I think of our brief email exchanges and live in hope. It was a privilege and a pleasure to meet and speak with the man, and the delight in reading him, even more listening to him read, lives on. Thanks for joining me in this loving look back at the life and art of John le Carré.
So there we are.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I really, really enjoyed it. Can I ask, did you ever have a conversation about Mary Mount, his editor at Penguin, and why was she not the editor on his last book?
I never had that discussion with him, and I only know from Bob Carre that his first editor was also Carro's editor, and he would say to Bob, "You want to see some real writing?" And he would show him the latest chapters that Cornwell had sent in. He had several different publishers. I know that this video has just been sent to a woman in Canada who was the head of Penguin Canada, and she dealt with him on a number of his manuscripts and actually visited him in Cornwall. But we never got into that sort of detail. I mean, besides what I've reported and what you've heard, I can't say there's much more to reminisce about my relationship with Cornwell. I'm just a huge fan, and I was pleased to be able to present his words and then sort of take off from what he said to give you. I mean, a lot of people don't know about audiobooks, and the difference between his reading of his writing and that of professional actors, I think, is mammoth, and he wins. So I wanted to expose people to that, and I wanted to make my little tribute to him. And I'm especially glad that the Hampton Library in Bridgehampton was able to do it on this day, which is the first anniversary of his death.
Well, thank you so much. We appreciate your time. We appreciate your effort. This was just a wonderful program, and I thank you so much. And I look forward to posting this up on the library's YouTube channel so that more people can enjoy the fruits of your labor of love. So thank you, David, and we look forward to speaking with you again soon.
My pleasure.